So when you talk about forest products, even though it does technically mean anything that can come from the forest, in practice and historically, this is overwhelmingly used to describe timber products, which typically involve killing a tree. And so the notion of non-timber forest products, it sort of stands in contrast to an idea that forestry is only about timber. And it's sort of the idea that there is value in other products of the forest, and that these products that aren't timber can also give a different kind of value to the living forest.
Es decir, en este caso todos los productos forestales no maderables vendrían a ser todos los que son fibras, cortezas, frutos, plantas medicinales, inclusive hasta el paisaje. El paisaje también es un producto forestal, ¿no? O sea, todo de lo cual tú puedes sacarle un aprovechamiento llega a ser son productos forestales no maderables, ¿no? Todas las actividades antrópicas que se hacen dentro del bosque son también productos forestales no maderables. Y bueno, mucha historia en el tiempo.
Perdón, te corto para no olvidar esto. So she mentions when we talk about non-timber forest products, there's a long list, and it includes fibers, it includes bark, it includes products that are used to make dye, it includes medicines, it includes fruits. And when we think about non-timber forest products, we can even consider ornamental plants. We can even consider ultimately looking at ecosystem services as a kind of non-timber forest product. But she says all of the human-generated activities in the forest are in relation to forest products, and sort of it doesn't have to be a focus on timber.
Y bueno, solo lo último que me queda decir con respecto a estos productos, de que en el tiempo han sido muchos de estos productos domesticados, como es el caso del caucho, la palma, el aceite, las mantecas, el cacao, que son productos que tienen buen tiempo, que se están utilizando con un buen manejo, ¿no? Dentro del bosque.
And just one final thing to mention is that many of the non-timber forest products that we're most familiar with by name, rubber, oil palm, even cacao, these are ultimately NTFPs, non-timber forest products, that have moved from the forest to the farms, have been domesticated, have sort of come across into the agricultural landscape from the wild landscape. And so it's just important to mention that ultimately non-timber forest products can even include things that aren't coming from the wild forest.
Mm-hmm. I did not realize that. Thank you for that answer. When I was on the farm, I remember one thing that was really important at Camino Verde was the work that you guys do, at least several times a week, probably more, I don't know, I was only there for about a week, but actually engaging with local farms, like next door. I remember one day we got in a boat. I think, Robin, you had a plant you needed to deliver to another farmer. And I just thought that was so great that you had these interactions with all the farms in this region. And I know non-timber forest products ties into this, so I'd love to know how you work with these local farms, just hear a little bit more about that.
Sure, yeah. I think it's been close to 10 years now that we've been working with farmers in the community where Olivia is right now, and where our main reforestation center is. And that relationship began in the form of sharing tree seedlings, as you're mentioning. We began producing tree seedlings, I guess, 13 years ago now. And our nursery was not meant to just sort of feed our own farming activities. Going back to sort of my personal story about the beginnings of Camino Verde, it was really our intention to be that source of seeds and seedlings that you couldn't find anywhere else, that were from the species being lost in the forest. And so we started probably by offering kind of the species that were most familiar and most attractive, and not necessarily all native species. So we've planted orange trees and lemon trees with farmers. But as time has gone by, the relationship has sort of shifted more to looking at the species that we know have economic benefit for farmers. And in our case, that's sort of actually meant developing a supply chain with some of those products, not just delivering seedlings and then saying, hey, you know, best of luck when you have a fruit to sell, but actually sort of continuing to have a conversation with those farmers about what markets do you have access to, what markets would be better to have access to. And most of the trees that we plant with farmers, honestly, are fruit trees that are for either family consumption, what you might call food security, or they're fruits for local market. And I think there's been a lot of sort of steam or wind in the sails put toward the notion of export crops, export products as being sort of the way to bring a better economic outcome for farmers. And that's been the case in Peru with species like cacao. And cacao is great, chocolate is great. Everybody's gonna continue to eat chocolate and there will always be a market for it. But kind of, it's interesting to see that farmers would plant cacao for that external market, and then the region is a net importer of chocolate. Or, you know, farmers are producing oranges to sell to the Andean region nearby, but then Madre de Dios is a net importer of oranges. And so these are also conversations that we get into with farmers about sort of where value lies and how farmers can ultimately get more for the products that they're producing. And unfortunately, our local markets in Madre de Dios, they do have sort of this emphasis on middlemen and sort of intermediates, which ends up really not favoring the farmers economically. They don't get as high a percentage of the price that sort of the consumer buys for the final product as they probably should. So one of the ways that we kind of work with this reality is essentially to support farmers markets, if you will, where farmers can directly take their products to local markets and not have any intermediate or middleman. But another area where we've increasingly focused energy is, in fact, on one of these dreaded export products that's not mainly meant for local consumption. But we feel a little better about it as an export product. We're not doing shipping containers full of cacao beans. It's actually, you know, liter bottles that fill up a box, kind of. And of course, that product is essential oils. And we've been producing essential oils from native Amazonian plants for about 10 years now, actually. And so more and more, as we're seeing some success in the development of that supply chain, we're wanting to bring more of the tree seedlings of aromatic Amazonian trees to the farms of the farmers and the communities that we work with. And so 7 years ago, we started planting rosewood, Brazilian rosewood. It used to be an ingredient in Chanel No. 5. It's also amazing tone wood for guitar making, and as a result is on the brink of extinction in the wild. And interestingly, rosewood trees would be pulled up roots and all, out of the ground in the forest. And these are huge trees, because even the roots contain the essential oil. And so rosewood populations were decimated in the last 50 years throughout the Amazon, but you actually don't have to cut down the whole tree to get essential oil. And kind of the light bulb or the aha moment for us was sort of this notion that the same economic drive or the same market force that led to the obliteration of this species in the wild could be sort of turned to be an incentive for the reforestation of this species. So 7 years ago, we started planting rosewood with one native community, actually not in Tambopata, but in Loreto, in the northern Peruvian Amazon, just off the Amazon River proper. And those trees have now been producing leaves and branches, which we use to distill essential oil for 4 years now. And that's meant that every month we purchase branches from the trees that we planted in the communities. And this is now sort of proof of concept. And as you can imagine, what started as a small pilot working with a few community members has grown to where it's everybody in that community has planted rosewood. Everybody in the community next door has planted rosewood. And the Federation of Native Communities in that area, which I think has 11 communities in it, all have requested that we plant rosewood there. So it's really an amazing example of a non-timber forest product that can really incentivize the regeneration, in this case of sort of in a very direct way, of the biodiversity of our area. And of course, Heather, as you know, rosewood is also related to a beautiful tree called Moina alcanfor, which we were honored to have turned into a perfume. And these are trees that are in the family called Lauraceae, which is maybe known in the sort of fragrance world for trees like cinnamon and camphor. But rosewood is just one of dozens of species of aromatic Lauraceae in the Peruvian Amazon. And it's not to say that kind of the others are going to be a replacement for rosewood that fill the same role, but it's sort of promising to think that we don't have to put all of our eggs in one basket with just planting rosewood and sort of having that be the silver bullet. Because we know from experience that the Amazon abhors a monoculture.
And non-timber forest products, like essential oils like Moina alcanfor, help to incentivize rainforest conservation.
En general, los productos forestales no maderables dan un valor económico al bosque diferente de lo que es la extracción de la madera, lo que involucra crear acceso a dinero a la gente con un manejo menos, ¿cómo decirlo? Te explico, Robin, que los agricultores pueden tener menos trabajo de obra para esta actividad, o sea, que menos esfuerzo y mayor productividad porque son fáciles de manejar porque son productos del bosque, ¿no? Y no necesita mucho manejo porque son muy fáciles de manejar. Y también que son productos renovables, ¿no? De que se va a regenerar en el tiempo y solamente va a dar más producción.
So she refers to the fact that non-timber forest products typically are perennial in nature, and they continue to produce in time. They're renewable in that sense. It's not just like timber where it's one-time harvests and you're done and that tree is gone. But another point that she brings up, which is really particularly relevant to the experience of an Amazonian farmer, as you can imagine, it's a lot of hard work being a rainforest farmer. And the management of non-timber forest products from perennial sources such as trees actually ends up being less work for the farmer. The management is more simple to, for example, harvest branches from a tree, which you've planted yourself, than to slash and burn a plot to plant corn, which is something that then leaves you sort of out under the hot tropical sun all day long, doing the weeding, doing the harvesting. So there are real direct benefits in sort of a real visceral kind of experiential way to the farmers from shifting away from annual crops and sort of the deforestation cycle associated with it to sort of permanent managed areas that continue to be productive in time.
Could you elaborate a bit about how the work being done at Camino Verde is contributing to ecological research?
El hecho de ser un centro de reforestación, hacemos... me salió que estaba un poco inestable, perdón. Al dedicarnos a reforestar, estamos recuperando especies que se están perdiendo, ¿no? Entonces, eso como parte de la información que se necesita para hacer cualquier tipo de estudio o que es preciso para el tipo de datos, información y conservación de especies es importante primero para la ciencia, ¿no?
Since we're focusing on planting species that aren't being planted very much elsewhere, it's been an important sort of task to collect data on our planting and on the results of that planting with the hope of contributing to sort of the body of knowledge about these species in a way that could also encourage others to plant them.
Trabajamos con sistemas agroforestales de alto nivel biológico, ¿no? Tenemos muchísimas especies en poco espacio y bueno, esto de aquí hace que se creen lugares en los cuales tenemos información de todas las especies que están siendo reforestadas, como en el momento que se ha ido desarrollando en el tiempo, y esto hace que al manejar estas áreas, que son áreas de se vuelven áreas de investigación perennes. Hasta ahí.
So we focus on the establishment of high biodiversity agroforestry systems, and which is just a fancy way of saying in a small area, we plant a lot of different species of trees. And as a result, we're also learning about the interactions among these species when they're planted together, as opposed to in a monocultural plantation. And throughout the course of our experiences, we've sort of come to consider these as permanent research plots as well, experimental plots that are permanent, where we're constantly learning more about the species that we've planted.
Entonces, al hacer estos sistemas agroforestales de alta diversidad, podemos evaluar el crecimiento de las especies en relaciones interespecíficas. Podemos ver y se puede evaluar el diferente crecimiento que puede tener una especie en un ambiente diferente, rodeada de otras diferentes plantas, ¿no? Que tienen diferentes tipos de ecología, digamos, ¿no? Porque hay forestales, maderables, frutales, para uso de medicina, para recuperación de suelos, para atrayente de insectos. O sea, son interacciones interespecíficas que pueden dar mucha información. Y bueno, me gustaría que Robin hable de esta parte porque tiene que ver con la aplicación que están produciendo Robin con otra gente que puede hacer un análisis comparativo de estas relaciones, ¿no? Entonces, Robin, por favor, si puedes contarles un poquito.
So she says that we're actually sort of learning about the ecology of the species that we're planting, because we're learning about interspecies interactions. We're learning about sort of what happens to a fruit tree when a timber tree is next to it. And even, you know, learning important things about the proximity of those trees, the best spacing to what distance to plant trees at from one another. And also, are there interactions between different species that are beneficial to the growth of those involved? Or maybe there are species that are attractive to certain insects or pollinators. And so it really is sort of an ecological study of these agro ecosystems that are growing. And she is sort of passing the baton to me to mention also that we are now working on a technology with the intention of making this ongoing monitoring of the trees a lot more efficient. And so this is something that is a new thing for Camino Verde, but essentially we've spent a lot of time out in the field measuring trees by hand with a measuring tape to look at the growth rate of those trees over time. And we know that that's not really an efficient way to do it. So we've been fortunate enough to work with a technology partner based in the US that is helping us to develop a very simple sort of field experience of an application for a smartphone that just using photographs taken of trees in a plantation is going to allow us to actually generate a map of that plantation tree by tree that shows the size of those trees, maybe in a similar way to what you would get if you flew a drone over it, but actually a lot more accurate from being based on the ground. And so we're really excited that means we'll be able to actually show every single tree at our reforestation center. How is it growing year by year? How much carbon is it capturing? And have access to a much greater degree of detail. We think it's pretty cool. It's a sort of an exciting new thing, but it's not exciting because, oh, then Camino Verde can show exactly how big each tree is that we've planted. For us, the exciting thing is the notion that farmers who maybe can't even read can probably take pictures on a smartphone after a short training. And our intention is to register every single one of the rosewood trees that we plant with farmers and register every single one of the moena trees that we plant with farmers as a sort of a next level transparency tool for our supply chain. And so our technology partner is working with blockchain, which is also just a technology to ensure that the data that is being put into our database is not something that can be tampered with or falsified. Or and the exciting thing for us is that means we can really sort of give as much benefit as possible, as much value as possible into the hands of farmers directly.
You mentioned the pandemic, and we were wondering if you could elaborate a little bit about that, how the pandemic has affected your work.
Nos cogió la pandemia estando en la chacra, a nosotros, a varios de los trabajadores, y la verdad de que aunque hemos podido desarrollar muchas de las actividades de las que normalmente tenemos las metas, ha sido un poco complicado. Los retos han sido más que todo con la comunidad, ¿no? Porque había mucha desinformación porque vivimos muy alejados de la ciudad y no tenemos señal de teléfono ni de internet. Entonces éramos como los canales de información para algunos vecinos de la zona. decir traduciendo.
So she says that for many of our team, and actually she and I, we were caught by the pandemic there on the farm. And it was it has been a very severe, strict lockdown in Peru, including curfew at night and military presence and strictly enforced rules. But for places like ours that are technically agricultural sector and where our staff lives on site at the Reforestation Center, we were actually able to continue working somewhat normally, which actually our staff has appreciated very much as the pandemic has really economically hit the region very hard as well. Olivia mentions that also we've become a little bit of a channel of reliable information for farmers in our area. The river is kind of our highway, and there's no police checkpoint on the river. And so we've continued to have, the ability to visit farmers, though we maintain our social distancing. And there have been times where entire communities have been completely shut to outsiders, especially in Loreto in northern Peru. And so for many farmers, there's a feeling of being more isolated than ever before, and not necessarily having access to radio or internet or sources of information. And so oftentimes our interactions with neighbors have been about just kind of debunking, stories that were shared that didn't actually turn out to be true, and just kind of sharing a little bit more reliable information that we've been able to get thanks to having a phone signal that Olivia is now using from the farm.